In September of 1942, the British troopship RMS Laconia was hit by the German U-156 submarine just off the coast of West Africa. The vessel was carrying about 2,200 passengers, all of whom were now struggling for their lives. However, when the U-boat commander learned that there were more than 1,000 Italian prisoners of war aboard Laconia, he ordered his crew to turn around and go back. It is widely believed that German crews used to abandon the scene of the attacks they perpetrated as soon as possible, but the reality was often the opposite. However, on this occasion, this seemingly humane act would also cost the Germans dearly. Disaster strikes. On September 12, 1942, RMS Laconia sailed from Cape Town, South Africa, to Freetown in Sierra Leone. The ship was carrying about 1,800 Italian prisoners of war, along with 400 Allied service personnel, 80 civilians, and her crew, totaling almost 2,800 people. At 10 p.m., the German U-156 submarine, commanded by Korvettenkapitän Werner Hartenstein, spotted the troopship floating by herself. The Germans saw RMS Laconia as a legitimate target because she was armed, a crucial detail that excluded her from being warned before an impending attack. As such, U-156 immediately engaged, and even though Laconia was following a zigzag course, she was still struck directly by 2 torpedoes. At 10:22 p.m., Laconia transmitted a distress signal, and while additional messages were issued, there's no record that they were received by any nearby vessel. There were enough lifeboats for the entire ship's complement, including the Italian prisoners, but heavy listing prevented the majority from being launched until the vessel had mainly settled. By the time the last remaining lifeboats were launched, most of the survivors were already in the water. Many lifeboats had only a few passengers, and one even left without anyone on board. Chaos reigned under the decks, and while the Italian prisoners of war were abandoned as the ship sank, most of them escaped by breaking down hatches and climbing up ventilation ducts. Still, as the prisoners tried to latch onto rafts or any other floating item found in the water, they were struck by the Polish guards. Even worse, hungry sharks were looming on the horizon. RMS Laconia. RMS Laconia was an English civilian ocean liner built in 1921 and launched in 1923 by Swan, Hunter, and Wigham Richardson Limited. The ship, with a total length of 601.3 feet and a maximum speed of 16 knots, was constructed in Wallsend, Northumberland. In January of 1923, the ocean liner began the first around-the-world cruise, which lasted 130 days and called at more than 20 ports. Then, after almost 2 decades of civilian operations, the RMS Laconia was requisitioned for the war effort in 1942. While initially converted into an armed merchant cruiser, Laconia was refitted as a troop ship with ample space to carry Allied combatants. The new commander was Captain Rudolph Sharp, and the ship had 463 officers and crew. Sharp had previously been in charge of RMS Lancastria, another British ocean liner that was sunk in 1940 by the Germans, just as her crew was picking up Dunkirk survivors in French waters. In early 1942, Laconia and her crew made trooping voyages to the Middle East, but later in the year, the ship expanded her routes to Africa, mainly transporting Italian prisoners of war from Cape Town to Freetown. Turn back. When Laconia was hit by 2 torpedoes in September of 1942 off the coast of West Africa, and many of the survivors ended up in the water, U-156 suddenly surfaced. Contrary to Allied propaganda and general belief, German submarine forces did not routinely attack the crews of the vessels they had just destroyed. Back in 1943, German submarine commanders were willing to go to great lengths to protect the lives of other shipwrecked mariners, and often assisted survivors with food, water, basic medical care, and a compass bearing to the nearest landmass. In the early stages of World War II, the German Navy's submarine arm tried hard to abide by the 1936 London Submarine Protocol. Under the agreement, placed to govern naval operations in times of war, merchant ships were not allowed to be sunk without warning, and adequate provisions were made for their crews. The agreement also prohibited the use of submarines as weapons of war, but the Germans usually ignored this part of the protocol. As such, Captain Werner Hartenstein ordered his crew to return to the attack zone, and to their surprise, they spotted over 2,000 people struggling in the water, amongst them women and children. Realizing that he'd just endangered the lives of so many prisoners from a country that supported Germany, the captain decided to help. As U-156 approached the location, the crew asked for help from an Italian submarine and 2 other German U-boats in the vicinity. At the same time, 3 Allied warships, 1 French and 2 British, also sped to the scene to aid in the rescue. Unforeseen Rescue Protocol. The U-156's crew immediately began picking up survivors, placing them on the foredeck, feeding them, and treating their injuries. One survivor later recalled how shocked he was when a German officer he believed was punching an Italian was in fact trying to resuscitate him. During his debriefing, the witness referred to the captain as, quote, a smashing fella. In the early morning of September 13th, Captain Hartenstein broadcast a message in English, not in code, to all the vessels in the surroundings. The memo included his exact position, requesting assistance for the rescue and promising not to attack. While British stations in Freetown intercepted the German message, they believed it could be a ruse and refused to help. Still, several German U-boats joined in the rescue efforts, 7 of which were diverted by Admiral Karl Dönitz from a planned surprise attack on Cape Town, South Africa. The decision enraged Hitler, who ordered Dönitz to send the boats back to Cape Town per the original plan. U-156 ultimately remained at the scene of the attack for the next 2.5 days, and by September 15th, the submarine was crammed with almost 200 survivors, with 200 more divided into 4 lifeboats. Not so fast. That same day, American stations in the vicinity received a message stating that RMS Laconia had been torpedoed, and the British merchant ship Empire Haven was en route to pick up survivors. However, the awkwardly worded message implied that the troopship was sunk, and failed to clarify that the Germans were involved in the rescue attempt, and that neutral French ships were also en route. Still, U-156 was joined by more vessels at 11:30 a.m. And soon after, 4 submarines with lifeboats in tow, the Red Cross flag draped across their gun decks, and hundreds of hopeful survivors hanging on to their lives, headed for the African coastline to a rendezvous with several Vichy French warships dispatched to help with the relief mission. On the morning of September 16th, the crew of an American B-24 Liberator heavy bomber, flying from a secret airbase in Ascension, spotted the German submarine traveling above the surface with a red cross draped around its weaponry. Captain Hartenstein immediately sent messages to the pilot in both Morse code and English, requesting assistance for all survivors on board, including Allied soldiers, civilians, women, children, and many prisoners of war. Not knowing what to do with such an unexpected request, the United States Army Air Force's pilot, Lieutenant James D. Harden, turned away and notified his base of the peculiar situation. The senior officer on duty then ordered the B-24 to sink the submarine immediately, as he didn't believe this was a Red Cross-sanctioned German rescue operation. The officer would later state that he assumed the German submarine was only rescuing the Italian prisoners of war. Following orders, Pilot Harden flew back to the scene and at 12:32 p.m. attacked the submarine with the powerful bombs and depth charges that made the B-24 Liberator a legend. The Laconia Incident. At the moment of the attack, Captain Hartenstein had no choice but to crash dive to protect his own vessel, abandoning all survivors. Moreover, one lifeboat was destroyed during the strafing, and another was overturned, leading to many casualties. Hartenstein asked the remaining boats to stay in the area and wait to be rescued by the French, but 2 disobeyed and headed for Africa. The lifeboat reached the African coast 27 days later with significantly fewer survivors, and another was rescued by a British trawler after 40 days at sea and with only 4 of its 52 occupants. Ultimately, only about 40% of the more than 2,700 people aboard RMS Laconia survived the event, and it became known as the Laconia Incident. The Laconia Incident had far-reaching consequences for the remainder of World War II. On September 17, 1942, Admiral Karl Dönitz issued an order in which the German High Command prohibited U-boat crews from carrying out rescue operations. The survivors were to be left in the sea, with no exceptions. The rule was initially called the Triton Null, but eventually became known as the Laconia Order. Still, several U-boats would continue to provide aid for survivors during the war, defiantly disregarding the orders. After the war, Admiral Dönitz was indicted at the Nuremberg trials for several war crimes, one of which included issuing the Laconia Order. However, this declaration backfired when the Germans showed evidence that the Allies had also acted callously in similar circumstances, and that the Americans had used the same tactics all throughout the war. Still, the Laconia Incident exposed a more humane side of World War II. Thank you for watching Dark Seas. If you enjoyed our video, make sure to hit the like button and share it with someone. And to find more videos about exciting historical anecdotes, don't hesitate to subscribe to all our Dark Documentaries channels. Stay tuned.